I've always made a living out of chasing ghosts that never existed. My name's Mike Enslin, author, skeptic, and the guy who sleeps in haunted houses so you don't have to. Most of the time, the scariest thing I find is a leaky pipe or bad wallpaper. My books sell because people like to believe in things that go bump in the night. I like proving them wrong. My next book was supposed to be 10 Nights in 10 Haunted Hotels, a catchy title for another round of empty thrills. So when I first heard about room 1408 at the Dolphin Hotel in New York, it felt like fate was handing me the final chapter. Supposedly cursed. 42 confirmed deaths. No explanation. People say it's the most haunted room in the city. To me, that sounded like good marketing. At first, I didn't think much of it. Another exaggerated tale, another easy debunk. But then I started getting warnings. First, a voicemail with no voice, just static and a long sigh. Then a note slipped under my door at another hotel, handwritten on hotel stationery. Don't enter room 1408. No name, no explanation, just those words. And like a moth to the flame, I was already circling. I booked the room. The hotel said it was unavailable for maintenance, but I pushed harder. Legal threats, public reviews. I've dealt with stubborn managers before. Eventually they agreed to let me in, but only for one night, and only after signing a mountain of waivers. That should have been the red flag. Instead, I felt a sick thrill in my gut. This was going to be the chapter people remembered. I told myself it was just another story. I'd walk in, set up my recorder, maybe hear a few creaks, and leave with some spooky quotes to dress up the chapter. Easy. Before I left for New York, I recorded an intro. This is Mike Enslin. Tonight, I'll be spending one night in room 1408. If you're hearing this, I either found nothing, or I found something I wasn't ready for. I laughed when I said it. But even then, something cold crept into my bones. Something I couldn't shake. As I packed my bag that night, I tossed in a few extra batteries, my recorder, a flashlight I'd never used before, and, almost as an afterthought, a silver crucifix someone once mailed me as a joke. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in hell. But I do believe in curiosity, and that night, mine burned brighter than my fear. Room 1408 was waiting, and I was ready to walk through the door. At least I thought I was. I met Mr. Olin in his office just off the lobby. The place smelled like old paper and furniture polish. The kind of room where secrets gather in the corners. He was already waiting, sitting behind a desk too polished for its age, hands folded like a man preparing for confession. "I'd like to ask you to reconsider," he said, before I'd even had the chance to sit down. No pleasantries, no small talk. Just that sentence. Calm, but heavy. I gave him my practiced smile. I've slept in basements in Salem and bathtubs in Louisiana. I've spent the night in a funeral home once. I'll be fine. But he didn't smile back. Instead, he leaned forward, voice low, like the walls might be listening. Room 1408 is not like those places. It's not haunted in the way you think. There are no ghosts rattling chains, no cold spots, no figures in the mirror. It's worse than that. He slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were copies of police reports, incident logs, death certificates, names, dozens of them. People who'd stayed in that room and never walked out. Jumpers, heart attacks, drownings, in a room with no tub. 42 confirmed deaths, Olin said, his eyes fixed on me. That's not counting the ones we think were accidents, or the ones that didn't die right away. One man bit off his own fingers and swallowed his tongue. The air in the room felt heavier, not cold, exactly, just dense, like I was breathing in someone else's fear. "I've kept that room closed for 11 years, he said. "I only let staff in once a month for a supervised cleaning, and even then only in pairs, never alone." I couldn't help it. I scoffed. "You're telling me the room's alive?" He didn't laugh. "I'm telling you the room doesn't like people, and it doesn't like being talked about." That stopped me. His eyes had a weight behind them, the kind you only get from witnessing something you can't explain and can never forget. The kind that keeps you awake at night long after the lights are out. "Then why let me in?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed like it hurt to answer. Because you threatened to sue, and because maybe, if I let you see for yourself, you'll finally believe that not all places can be explained. There was something in his voice, something that trembled just beneath the surface. Not anger, not frustration, but a deep, exhausted sadness. Like he'd tried so many times to keep people out of that room, and failed. "Look," I said, softening just a little. "I'm not trying to die. I'm just writing a book. I'll go in, take some notes, maybe a few pictures, and I'll be out by morning." Olin stared at me for a long time. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he reached into a drawer and pulled out the key. A real metal key, not a card. Heavy, ornate, old. He placed it on the desk, but didn't push it toward me. "If you step into that room," he said, "I hope to God you come back. But if you don't, know that I tried." I took the key. My fingers brushed his, and his hand recoiled, like the metal had burned him. And as I left his office, I could still feel his eyes on me. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Like a man who'd already attended too many funerals. The elevator stopped at the 14th floor with a jolt that felt deliberate, like the hotel itself was hesitating to let me out. I stepped into the hallway, and it was immediately clear something wasn't right. The air was thick, stale, heavier than it had been in the lobby. There were no sounds. No TVs murmuring behind doors. No ice machine humming at the end of the corridor. Just silence. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, like the perspective was off. The carpet was worn in strange patterns, and I had the odd feeling I was walking on something that didn't want to be walked on. Even the lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering in sync with my steps. Then I saw the door. Room 1408. At first glance, it looked normal. But the closer I got, the more it seemed wrong. Subtly distorted, like reality had shrugged its shoulders right at that spot. The frame was crooked, just slightly, leaning in on itself. The door had no number, just a brass plate that looked tarnished and bent. I reached for the key. Not a card, an actual brass key, cold at first touch. But when I slid it into the lock, the metal warmed in my fingers. Not metaphorically warm. Warm, like skin. Like it had a pulse. I paused, just for a second. But my pride was louder than my instinct. I turned the key. The lock clicked, and the door swung inward with a soft hiss. Not a creak. A hiss. Like something had been holding its breath. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me, faster than I expected. I turned to catch it, but it slammed with a finality that sent a shock up my spine. There was no turning back now. The room greeted me with a bland, neutral palette. Beige walls, old-fashioned bedspread, stiff armchair in the corner. Harmless, comfortably outdated. But it was too perfect. The symmetry of the furniture, the arrangement of the lamps, even the placement of the throw rug. It looked staged, like a set in a play. A place pretending to be a hotel room. I set my bag down and took out the recorder. I clicked it on and spoke into it. Enslin, Mike. Time, 8:04 p.m. Room 1408, Dolphin Hotel. Initial impressions. Room appears ordinary. Decor is dated, probably early 90s. Smells faintly of disinfectant and... I stopped. There was a sound. Not outside. Not in the hallway. Inside the room. A faint ticking. I looked around. No clock. No watch ticking that loud. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was organic. Like something thinking. I shook it off. Nervous energy, I told myself. I'd been in dozens of supposedly haunted rooms. They all tried to spook you with their silence, their atmosphere. This was no different. But as I walked deeper into the room, I realized something else. My ears hadn't popped when I left the elevator. And yet, there was pressure. Like I'd stepped into a sealed chamber. Then the light above the dresser flickered. Not a bulb about to burn out, but a pulse. Like the room had just blinked. I glanced at the door, considered opening it. But I didn't, because I'd come this far, and turning back now would mean admitting I was afraid. I took a deep breath and told myself, this is just a room. But the part of me that still listened to instinct? It was already screaming that I'd made a mistake. At first, room 1408 looked like any other room I'd ever stepped into. Beige walls, floral bedspread, bland hotel art nailed down to prevent theft or creativity. It was a hollow space, one that had been designed to be forgotten. And yet, within seconds of being inside, I realized something was wrong. I couldn't hear the city. This was New York City. Sirens, horns, voices, life. But the windows showed no movement, no lights, no sound. Just still air and a slice of sky that felt too flat to be real. I walked over and touched the glass. It was cold. Colder than glass should be, like it was faking its existence. I turned back to the room, and then I noticed the wallpaper. It had a pattern, something floral, but the petals began to twist, subtly, as if the design was bleeding. One moment they were leaves, the next, they were hands, open, reaching, always just at the edge of my vision. When I stared directly at them, they were back to flowers. But when I turned away, they moved. The lamps flickered. I checked the plugs. They weren't even connected to anything, just cords lying limp like veins torn from a socket. I switched one on. It buzzed to life, and then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. It was slow. Heavy. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Somewhere just behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the air felt disturbed, like something had just passed behind me and didn't care to hide it. The carpet gave under my shoes with a soft squish, like flesh. It wasn't wet. It wasn't dry. It was wrong. I stepped back instinctively and nearly stumbled over my own bag, which had shifted several inches from where I'd set it. I hadn't heard it move. I told myself to stay calm. I picked up the recorder. "This is Enslin," I said, but my voice came out quieter than I'd intended. "The room is responsive. Environmental manipulation, maybe. Visual trickery. Hallucinations possible." But I couldn't finish the sentence. The shadows had begun to crawl. They weren't flickering. They were creeping. From the corners of the room. Not fast, not overt, but like ink soaking into fabric. The light bulbs overhead began to pulse in a slow, rhythmic beat. The kind of pulse that matched breathing. And then the painting changed. It was a ship when I arrived. Just a little boat on calm waters. But the sea was no longer calm. Waves curled and crashed violently, lightning arced in the background, and a figure now stood at the bow of the ship, not sailing, staring, right at me. I took a step forward, and the figure grew sharper. It had no face, just shadows where the features should be. But I could feel its attention. Not curiosity, something else. Something closer to amusement. I checked my watch. It blinked 8:19. Then 8:17. Then 9:04. Then 8:19 again. The second hand stuttered, reversed, spun. Time had become liquid. I walked to the phone, picked it up, and placed the receiver to my ear. Nothing. Then static. Then a voice, my own, whispering, "Get out while you still remember who you are." I dropped it. That's when the temperature plunged. My breath crystallized, the windows fogged. Then the heat hit, like a furnace had just kicked on in my chest. I wiped my forehead, and my hand came away red. I checked again, no cut. But my reflection in the window was smiling, and I wasn't. The room ticked again, not a clock. A tick like an insect, like something watching, counting down. I realized with a growing chill that the room wasn't haunted. It was alive, and now it had noticed me. I don't know how long I'd been in room 1408 before I noticed time had stopped making sense. Minutes folded into each other. My watch blinked out, then came back showing hours that hadn't passed. My phone said it was 12 o'clock exactly, no matter how long I stared at it. The digital clock on the nightstand pulsed the same way the walls did. It didn't tick. It throbbed. I tried anchoring myself with sound. I turned on my recorder, spoke into it, tried to maintain some kind of normalcy. "This is Mike Enslin," I said. "Still in room 1408. Time unknown. Experiencing some perceptual distortion. possible hallucinations due to stress or environment, but the recorder didn't play my words back. When I rewound it, I heard only static, then a faint voice. My voice, whispering words I hadn't said. "You're already gone." That's when I saw my brother. He'd been dead for years, drowned in a lake when we were kids. But now, there he was, standing at the foot of the bed, pale, dripping. His eyes hollowed out like someone had scooped the soul from behind them. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. Bleeding slowly from the mouth, like the room was trying to replicate him but didn't know how much blood a memory was supposed to lose. I blinked, and he was gone, replaced by a menu on the desk. I picked it up. It looked normal at first. Continental breakfast available upon request. Then the letters shifted, turned foreign, then ancient, then melted all together into writhing symbols that began shaping into something. A silhouette of a boy. I watched, helpless, as the boy turned his head. Behind him, crawling from the ink, came a wolf. Its teeth gleamed. Its eyes were hollow like my brother's. Then the wolf lunged, and the paper burst into flame in my hands. I dropped it, but there was no fire, no ash, just the menu again. Sitting quietly, as if it had never moved. The window should have looked out onto 61st Street. I opened the curtain and found no city, no skyline, just a black void, swirling fog rising in slow motion. The glass was gone. In its place, an open hole, a fall that never ended. My reflection stared back from the fog. It blinked before I did. I backed away, tripping over the nightstand. The lamp fell, but didn't break. It twisted in the air mid-fall and landed gently. That's when I realized gravity didn't matter here. Reality didn't matter here. Something scratched at the inside of the walls, slowly, methodically. I pressed my ear to the paneling and heard whispering. Not voices, not language, just the sound of intent, of something building. Then the phone rang. I jumped, ran to it, picked up the receiver, hoping that a voice, even a ghostly one, would be something real. But all I heard was my own scream, from inside the phone. It wasn't a loop. It wasn't playback. It was my voice. But I hadn't screamed. Not yet. I dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. Except it wasn't water. It felt thicker, sticky. I looked up, and the mirror didn't reflect me. It reflected the room, but empty. No me. Just the furniture, the bed, the desk, the mirror itself. As if I'd already vanished and only the echo of me remained. That's when it hit me. Room 1408 wasn't haunted. It was constructed. A machine. It didn't want to frighten. It wanted to dismantle. Not hauntings. Programming. It was built, or born, to devour identity. To unravel the self. One memory at a time. And I had walked right into its jaws. And I could already feel my mind slipping. Threads fraying. I began to forget my middle name. The year. My mother's face. The worst part? I was starting not to care. I don't remember the moment I stopped trying to understand the room and started trying to survive it. Maybe it was when the walls began to breathe, literally swell and deflate like lungs. Or when my reflection started speaking back to me in a voice that wasn't quite mine. But I do remember the shift. One moment, I was Mike Enslin, skeptic, author, observer. The next, I was prey in a cage that had no bars, just shifting dimensions and cruel intentions. I tried calling for help. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand, gripping it like a lifeline. But as I lifted the receiver to my ear, it oozed, warm, soft, and wet, like it had grown a tongue. The plastic warped in my hand, sagged, then curled in on itself and melted. No dial tone, just the soft sound of static turning into my own scream again. Louder this time, closer, echoing in the room from no discernible source. I staggered backward, eyes wide, breath heaving. There had to be a way out. A door, a window, a crack, anything. But everything was shifting. Door frames too small, windows now bricked over, the room subtly changing itself every time I blinked. I ran to the bathroom and splashed my face. Water hit my skin, but it burned. I looked down. No water. Just blood. Thick and dark and bubbling up from the faucet like a wound. The drawer by the bed snapped open on its own. Papers flew out, fluttering in the air like bats. Some of them had my handwriting. Some had none at all. One sheet landed on my chest. It was my death certificate. The date was today. I couldn't breathe. My lungs fought the air, but the oxygen had been replaced with something else. Something heavy. I dropped to my knees, tried crawling toward the door. It was there, sure, but it might as well have been painted on the wall. The handle had no shape, just a silver smear that pulsed when I touched it, like muscle. That's when it hit me. Pain. Pain was real. Pain was mine. The room couldn't fake that. It could warp space, twist time, dredge up hallucinations and guilt and grief. But it couldn't fake pain. Pain belonged to me. I ripped my shirt off, reached for the lighter in my pocket, left over from a brief smoking habit I'd kicked years ago. I'd kept the Zippo out of habit. A souvenir, a comfort. Funny how the things we think are harmless end up saving us. I clicked the flame to life. I hesitated only once. Then I pressed the fire to the edge of the shirt, let it catch, let it spread. The heat was instant, real, unforgiving. I screamed. My skin blistered, nerves flared, tears burned from the corners of my eyes. But for the first time in what felt like hours, or years, I felt anchored. The room recoiled. I don't mean it shuddered. I mean it screamed. The walls let out a low groan, a moaning hum like steel warping under pressure. The carpet buckled. The ceiling cracked. The light bulbs exploded one by one, plunging everything into a chaos of smoke and firelight. And the door, the smeared, melted door, clicked. The lock turned. I didn't hesitate. I ran, still on fire, shirt half clinging to my chest. I burst through the door and into the hallway, screaming, flailing, just wanting air, distance, reality. A blur of motion tackled me. Someone, another guest maybe or staff, pushed me down and rolled me. A coat smothered the flames. I remember the weight of them on top of me, the sound of their panicked breathing, the feeling of cool carpet beneath my cheek. Then sirens, then darkness. But before I passed out, I looked back down the hall. The door to 1408 had closed itself. Perfect, undisturbed, waiting. I woke in a white room that smelled of antiseptic and burnt flesh. Beeping machines monitored the rhythm of my survival. The ceiling was still. The walls didn't breathe. The bed beneath me didn't shift. I was in a hospital, wrapped in layers of gauze, the sting of raw skin anchoring me to the moment. But even as I stared at the unmoving tiles above me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly left room 1408. Not entirely. They told me I was found in the hallway, on fire. They asked if I had fallen asleep smoking, if I had tried to hurt myself, if I had hallucinated, if I had been drinking, if there were drugs. I told them it was an accident, that I'd dropped my lighter on a pile of notes, that the flames had gotten out of control. But that was a lie, because no one would believe the truth. No one would believe that the room thought, that it watched, that it waited. It wasn't just haunted. It was an entity, not a ghost, not a collection of spirits, but a singular, malevolent force. A predator that fed not on flesh, but on the soul, by unraveling the mind one memory, one heartbeat, one scream at a time. I kept the story to myself, but inside, I was fraying. I could feel the damage lingering, like room 1408 had left fingerprints on my brain. I'd wake in the night, sweat-soaked, sure I was still inside it. Sometimes I'd see the walls shift just slightly in the corners of my vision, hear a distant ticking in the silence, feel the press of something watching me from just beyond the edge of the room. I tried playing back the audio from my recorder, the one I'd used to document the night. Most of it was garbled static, choppy, distorted. But there was one moment that came through clear. Right after the static faded, I heard my own voice. Only it wasn't a message I ever recorded. It whispered, "You shouldn't have come. Not said in fear, not in warning, but with certainty, like the room itself had used my voice to speak. I deleted the file, threw the recorder in the trash. But sometimes, even now, I swear I can still hear it when everything is quiet, when I'm alone. I tried moving on, tried writing again, but nothing comes. I sit at my desk, pen in hand, pages blank. The words don't feel like mine anymore. They feel borrowed. Or worse, taken. I no longer stay in hotels. I avoid elevators. I stopped writing about the supernatural. My publisher calls, begs for another book. Just one more haunted place, he says. The world loves a skeptic. But I'm not a skeptic anymore. I'm something else. A man who walked through a door he shouldn't have. A man who faced something that didn't want to be understood, only obeyed. Sometimes I pass by hotels and glance up at the top floors, and I swear I see a light flick on. A window open to blackness. A door slightly ajar. Waiting. Room 14. 08 is still there, and it remembers me.